welcome to my talk on how we do open source. Oh, okay, we're having a little bit of an adventure here. So first things first, the elephant in the room. When I proposed this talk, I did not know about the recent BSL change my company announced. I thought about what to do, and what I fell on was that my team and I have been working for the last 5 years in open source, and we still have a lot of relevant lessons to share. But we also have a lot of projects at HashiCorp that are still open source, so I'm going to focus on those because it wouldn't be too interesting for me to come up here and talk about lessons learned from the last few weeks. We're not quite there yet. So with that said, thank you for coming with me on this adventure. I am Melissa Gurney Green, and I am a former infrastructure engineer. I spent the better part of the last 2 decades building out data centers and solutions that help support some of the clouds that you use and love today. I currently run community at HashiCorp that consists of developer advocacy, community programs, and technical community management. We'll get into a bit of each of those. I was a host on the Speaking in Tech and TechVines podcasts, but I also do community in my personal life. So I'm a former umpire-in-chief in my local Little League, as well as actively involved in Scouts. So diving in. When you're getting started, the hardest part can actually just be doing the work. Getting into a project and thinking about, okay, I have this problem I want to solve, let's do it. But what happens when you find out that somebody's already kind of started to tackle it? Well, you kind of have 2 options. You can go in to help them and join their community, or you can try to build it yourself. And there's an immense amount of learning in trying to build it yourself, even if you do end up going in and joining this other community and helping them. So go ahead and take that first step and jump right in. A lot of people will ask, well, what if I fail? Well, if you don't start, then you'll never know, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in failure, and this was true with my kids' baseball team as well as other things. There's not a whole lot to learn always with winning. The lessons are always in those individual little failures and things that don't quite work the way you expected. But what if people go crazy and see my work isn't perfect? Well, welcome to the club. Anybody building software can tell you that none of our software is perfect. I don't know that anybody will, but I will. So there we go. Congratulations if you get there, because then you've found your community. These people will help you make your software even better. So before we start talking about downloads and stars, show of hands, how many people have starred or liked something online, never to return to it? Yes, okay, so my message here is don't focus on downloads and stars. A lot of us have download bots in our environment that can download things, and I could probably build one this afternoon and download a bunch of things. Doesn't mean I'm using it. It doesn't mean I'm engaged with it. It doesn't mean it's solving a problem for me. So really what we want to focus on is gathering feedback, answering questions, but issues and PR is key. So finding out how people are trying to use your tools, and then building around those use cases that are important to you. Focusing on those values, the reasons you first built that tool, and really jumping in. Now, we have several examples of this at HashiCorp, and we call these projects community-focused projects. One such project is Waypoint, but we also have several that the developer advocates have built. One such tool is Shipyard. We use that for demos, proof of concepts, and workshops. It makes it really easy, especially when you're at a conference, to have people load a package onto their laptop and be able to run it. It has built-in education. It's pretty super. Those kinds of things tend to stay with my team, and that's by design. Now, we have other things like the CDK for Terraform and Terraform operator for Kubernetes, and those were purpose-built for engineering adoption. See, we had a hunch that the community really wanted these things, really needed these things. So we built them in such a way that even though they started as the kind of minimum viable product, we built them so that engineering wouldn't have to completely rewrite them when they adopted them. And fortunately, the community engagement with those PRs and issues ended up being the thing that led to the company adopting them and hiring full teams to support both of those. Now, my last example here is really exciting to me as a person that used to work as a vendor in data centers and have all kinds of production access that I didn't necessarily need right away. One of the DAs came up and was like, hey, I really want to build this tool around privilege-based access management, and to where a company can assign temporary privileges to an on-call engineer or vendor in order to fix a specific problem. And these things would be time-based, and as soon as the time was up, they'd go back to losing those privilege and making the network overall more secure by default, right? So we built this out completely as a proof of concept to kind of showcase the art of the possible and demoed it at one of our conferences. And the response was amazing, both in terms of issues, but also in terms of people just going straight up to the product team and being like, hey, we need this in Boundary. And it led to the product team actually thinking about how to write a feature and adopt this thing, which is really, really cool. Now, if you're a company, what do you want to think about at this community-focused stage when you're building things? I'd say first and foremost is a DevRel function. Now, that doesn't mean go out and hire a developer advocate. What that means is find somebody in your engineering team that's really passionate about talking to users, and maybe even coming and speaking in a conference, and have that person be your ears and eyes in the outside world. And actually, this list, except for forums, is exactly how we did it at HashiCorp. So next up, you're going to want a code of conduct. This will teach the community how to interact with you and how to behave with each other. It's very important. Next, you may consider DMs and chat servers and mailing lists. We chose a conference and user groups as well. The key thing about an in-person conference for us was really about reaching the audience that wouldn't necessarily be comfortable speaking publicly. We have a lot of people, especially in the infrastructure space, that aren't shy about sharing their thoughts and ideas. But given that we also support security, and those people are less likely to publish details about their environment online, it was very important to have some in-person engagement options for those people so that we could connect them and get them closer to the engineers. Next, education team and docs people. These people are the heroes of DevRel, y'all. Nobody loves writing docs, except for these people, apparently. But getting people at that beginner mindset and bringing them on a journey and helping them advance is key to driving adoption. Next up, I have forums. Now, we did this a little later, but forums help with searchability and answering questions, and having those people be able, coming in with that question, to be able to reference that question and answer later. I like them a lot better than DMs and chat servers personally, and we actually ended up decommissioning our DMs and chat servers for the most part in favor of directing people to the forums. Now, at this stage, what do you want to watch out for? I say the number one thing you want to watch out for in the community is toxicity. And what I mean for that is a lot of people like to say that in a community, everyone's welcome. I don't subscribe to that. What I'll say is that in life and in community building, you shouldn't tolerate jerks, and you shouldn't be one. And with that, what I mean is you talk to people and understand why they're being this way, because sometimes it's just a passionate person that's frustrated. But you make it clear out loud to them and publicly as well that there's a certain way of engaging with people, and the behavior that you want and expect in a community is very important because the community's watching. And what you do matters here because they will act based on what you do. Next up, setting healthy boundaries to avoid burnout. So when you open these DMs and chat servers and you're doing all the work, it's very exciting to engage with the community, but everybody needs a break. Whether that's turning off your open source work at night or on weekends or taking vacations or all the above. You have to find a way to kind of set those boundaries and turn off and relax and recharge. This will help you better manage the community, but also build better tools. So what happens is things start to take off, and you need a bit of a bigger boat. You're facing bigger challenges. You're building for bigger things. You're adding features. Well, for us, one of the things that happened was the modularization of Terraform Core. Now, what I mean by that is initially, Terraform Core had the cloud providers built into the core source code. This made it kind of heavy, but it also made it harder to contribute, because what if this change affected this other change? So what we did is we broke out the providers to allow the software to be a lot more modular, but also so that people could download what they needed. But it also enabled a better contribution model and a lot more options down the road for those cloud providers in terms of engagement, contribution, participation, and maintenance overall. With this, you might want to consider building a contributor program. And what that means is the people that come and contribute to your code should feel appreciated. They should feel like they know how to submit code that's going to be accepted. But it also will help you bring them in closer to your product, because if these people are coming back and submitting quality contributions over time, odds are they have the best view of what your users are going to want next. So keeping them close is a great idea. I was actually hired in between the contributor programs and the influencer program step here, brought in the forum, and took over the contributor programs and user groups. So I brought in influencer programs right about here, and in my mind, they needed to be different. And the reason they needed to be different was because influencers like to hear about all things. They like to hear about roadmaps. They like to talk about these things. They like to go out and do. Contributors, not always. Contributors would rather focus on the tool or tools that they're passionate about and have more one-on-one conversations. They're not necessarily into the networking. So we kept the programs separate, and some people are in both, but they're rare. And we really focused the influencer programs on enabling people to talk about things that are coming up and how that might look to the world. The next thing we introduced was virtual community conferences, and this was actually at the suggestion of one of our community members. And the wonderful thing about introducing them here, and this was in a pre-COVID world, but the wonderful thing about introducing them is it opened up a whole new layer of enablement for people who wanted to share information about how they used our tools. And this is important because these people are better references than anyone you will ever hire. But also, it allowed us to build the next generation of speakers, the next generation of people that we wanted to meet in terms of those contributor programs and influencer programs that are out there. It's very easy to get trapped in a situation where you know the people you know, and you're constantly just bringing them up. So what does it look like to measure and engage at this stage? Well, with issues and PRs, we start digging into things like time to first response. Now, for a community-focused effort that we talked about earlier, that could and should be within 3 working days. You want to keep your community really close and respond to them as quickly as possible. But as you're going and building this tool, things get a lot more complex. You've got some technical debt. You've got a lot more production users to think about. So for that, we need to think about our responses a lot more carefully. We need to do a lot more testing in order to add something quality. So for that, we're thinking probably 7 to 14 days as far as a response time for working days. We're also looking at things like the number of users attending conferences and user groups, and we're starting to build enablement engines for contributions so that we're not just focused on the key contributors of the past who built their context with us, but we now are focusing on new contributors that kind of need to learn the context of how to engage with us a little bit. So guidelines for contributions, things like issues and PR templates really helped us here. I'd say consider SLAs for response. This is just good communication. We haven't done this yet, but I'd love to see it. We got into a little bit of upvote-driven development here, so starting to prioritize based on what the community is telling us they want. We also considered upgrading our developer advocacy model and did it. You see, it's really hard to hire people who are experts in 6 different tools that span 3 different disciplines. Now that we're 8 plus cloud products, it's even harder. So what we did is we went to what we call a T-shaped model. We hired experts in each tool, taught them a little bit about the others for integration, and it also made our meetings a lot more manageable, because now we're only attending meetings for 1 tool instead of 6 to 8, which left us with all our days in meetings back then. So it was a very good change. Things to watch out for at this stage. Of course, toxicity never goes away, and there's a lot of things that kind of carry on as the stages go. But you kind of need to reflect and think about where you're at and what your values are at each stage. With toxicity specifically in the community, what you'll see if you did your job in the early phases is that some of the community members will come to bat for you here, which is really kind of amazing, and say, no, 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 this is not how we do things. What we need to do is this, or here's how you should engage. Another thing to watch out for is meaningless enablement. And what I mean by that is, as you grow in popularity, there will be a ton of requests for things that people think you should do. If you stay focused on your core values and what matter to your users, what you'll find is the priorities kind of set themselves, which is really nice. Now, competition's awesome and it drives innovation, but it's also a bit of a trap. And what I mean by that is, at this stage, you're definitely going to have competitors emerge, and they're going to have different thoughts and opinions than you, and that's great. But the trap is in trying to copy, or trying to be just like them, and saying, oh, well, the competitors have this, and the competitors have that, and just chasing down those features, and not really thinking about, OK, the future of our user base looks like this, and trying to build that instead. With boundaries and burnout here, the key that we moved away from was all of those instant messaging kind of applications and stuff, and trying to find a way to make the information and questions and answers that people were seeking a lot more searchable and readable. So that's something we tackled at this stage, but it'll have to be considered at every stage, just like managing the community. So what happens when the boat gets too big, right? We had this happen with our cloud providers. We had thousands of issues and things going unanswered for a while, and it got very tough. And one of the things that we did as we approached this is, of course, we reached out to those cloud partners and said, hey, we need some help. And we got some help. We also found that some of our key contributors could become maintainers. So we brought those people in too. But we also went and built a triage team, and that triage team is called Technical Community Managers. And some of the things that they do, which is really important, is try to tune down the noise a little bit in terms of issues and PRs. So go in there, find the issues that are well-written, well thought out, popular with the community, and bubble those up to the top. Find the bugs that are really urgent to fix, and bring those back to the engineers. The engineers aren't digging through thousands of lines of PRs to find this stuff. It really led to a great prioritization of work, but also a lot more community-oriented roadmap. So we went to a metrics-driven development model to where we could find out, okay, especially with the cloud providers when they're releasing hundreds of services a day, which services are really important to our user base, and how do we prioritize those and drive adoption of those things in order to enable the community to use our tool most effectively for most of their use cases. So what does it look like to measure and engage at massive scale? You still need to refocus on your values and identity. But at this stage, we also built a lot of automated tools and systems to help out. So we went from this mess of scripts and spreadsheets and forms to GitHub projects and forms and whatnot. We also introduced something here called Developer Advocate Impact Hours. And what that allowed us to do was really track the content that was being created and understand what was impactful and what wasn't. We also look at things like returning speakers versus new speakers as an indication of community growth, but also how we're doing in enabling our community to speak and share the knowledge that they have on our tools. And lastly, we introduced something called open source health metrics. And with this, we took a scoring system based on the maturity of the project and applied things like response time, bug fixes, and other things to it, and came up with a red, yellow, green number that we're still kind of iterating on. But what it does is it helps us understand the work that our technical community managers are doing and when these projects need help. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but metrics can be pretty cool. Up in the top right, we have, top left for you all, we have one of the GitHub projects that supports one of our cloud providers. And what it does is it really helps us understand how we triage requests today and where we're making progress. When you have thousands of issues to get through, it's really kind of tough to understand, okay, where am I at? Am I actually making progress? What's going on? So that's an exciting one. The other one here is impact hours by channel. And this is something our DAs did. You can see a little bit of seasonality in the data here. Funny story, we had about half the developer advocacy team at HashiCorp last year out for parental leave during this period of time. So in the spirit of trying to keep ourselves sane, we didn't try to match the level of advocacy we had before. We said, well, we're here, we're gonna stay here, and whatever we produce is what we produce, and then when they come back, we'll be back to normal. And that's kind of how we did it. Things to watch out for at this stage. A lot of these things stay the same, but I'd say key are perspective and echo chambers. Specifically, when something goes horribly wrong, it's really easy to feel like everybody sees it. So take a moment to step back and look at who's actually seeing it and go, okay, maybe this isn't the end of the world. And say another thing is echo chambers. When you have something that's pretty popular, there'll be a lot of people that just agree with you and concur by default or support you, and it's wonderful. But at the same time, you kind of have to watch out for it. Because that feedback from the alternative voice is what's going to help you make your tool even better for more users. So back to that elephant, shall we? In all honesty, the BSL change hasn't changed a lot of the way we work internally as far as a community team goes. We're still working to support our users. But what it has done is changed kind of the way we engage people in public and the things that we talk about, and that people come to us and now ask us about this change. And we have resources to point them to, like the licensing email and stuff like that. With that, what I will say is thank you. Keep in mind your priorities as you're building, and if you have any questions at all, there's a lot that I couldn't cover today, but please come find me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. If you can't reach me today, you can find me online at Solution Geek or at melissa@hashicorp.com. Thank you so much.